right, welcome on in to another episode of Oh So Curious. Of course, today is a special day. We've got some breaking news. Wait, I've got something for that. That's right. Of course, you guys have been seeing the news all over. We know what's going on. If you're tuning in, well, Netflix won the bidding war. They came out on top, and they took all the IP, all the franchises, all the good stuff that Warner Brothers has to offer. So, of course, we're going to talk about it. We're going to get into what all of that means. You know, there's many parts and pieces to it all. So I'm going to explain it to you guys as best as I can. And I'm sure you guys have questions, you guys have ideas and suggestions, and we'll get into a nice conversation. You know, of course, it looks like things are not quite over yet, right? Because there's a lot more to go, right? Well, even though Warner Brothers has picked a winner in the bidding war, Paramount might not be so docile and just walk away, let's say. They might still have a few tricks up their sleeve. And then, of course, we have to get into the fallout. You know, what happens now? Like, what happens with Warner Brothers employees? David Zaslav held town hall with the employees today, just talking about what's next. Because obviously they want to hear, like, are they going to have jobs in a few months' time? Are they still going to split up the company and let the networks go their own separate ways? Because Netflix does not want any of that stuff. And of course, you know, all the other, impacts, like, for example, on the TV side of things, like, how does that affect shows like Ted Lasso, which are made by Warner Brothers, but now under Netflix? Would Netflix be making a show for Apple TV? Like, we'll talk about all of those things and so much more. And to do that, I'm going to hit that news intro and get the show started.
It doesn't seem to matter what I do. I'm always the number two.
All right, mister, I need to paint my abs on to get nominated. You don't see Robert Downey doing that.
You're kidding. You're kidding. I can't open the envelope without the...
Warner Brothers is heading back into the Matrix with a new movie in the works.
Wonder what other surprises are in store.
I want to be Bruce Wayne. I like that. You're gonna love me.
There's the shot, right there. That.
Okay, we don't need to see chorus.
Right there.
You look ridiculous.
Well, not no more, he don't.
What, dude? I can barely understand you. Your accent's insane.
What
Give me a hand up. Nope, I'm actually okay. Thank you very much. Oh, wow. Wow.
All right, okay. Let's get into it, shall we? Now, if you guys are watching live, and if you are always here watching us live, I know the usual suspects. I'll get into the live chat in a moment. Just know this. Today, we've got a special show schedule, so I'm doing this right now with you guys. So I'm running solo on the whole deal because John otherwise would be in rant mode. And, you know, while we like a good rant, and I'm sure we'll get a few of those later tonight, I wanted to spend some time and let's talk through what the biggest news of the day in Hollywood, what might change the entertainment landscape, movies, TV, streaming, as we know it forever. Because this is quite frankly the biggest deal in the history of Hollywood, at least in modern times, right? Netflix buying Warner Brothers Discovery, like two of the biggest players in this the Hollywood space. So Netflix, of course, agreed to pay $82.7 billion in Warner Brothers merger. The deal is not final yet. Now it gets to move forward into the steps where it needs regulatory approval. There's a lot of, I's to be dotted and T's to be crossed. So with that in mind, like I said, today we're doing a special live show to talk about that whole story, which we'll get into in a minute. And then after that, we're going to take a slight break and then come back to you with the DCU Daily. So the usual DCU Daily. We'll have a lot more DC conversation. You've got some Marvel news, all the stuff is CCXP and so on and so forth. Then we'll have our Fancast Friday. You guys have been voting for your pick. And at last check, I believe for Fancast Friday, MCU Gwen Stacy was in the lead by a healthy margin, no less. So we will talk about that later on. But before I move any further forward, I just want to welcome everybody in the chat. The last Zarnian is in the chat today live. Hello. Lobo, our main man, is here. Caleb is here, of course. Tony is here. Honka honka. The greatest Also Curious thumbnail of all time. Thank you. I'm not going to take all the credit for it, but it's great art. It's great artwork. So Wow, am I losing my voice already? No. Okay. Um, who else? I think I mentioned Monique is here. Emo Nerd Girl is here. Hello, what's up? You guys are in for a long show tonight because it's not just one, not two, well, three shows. I was gonna do the whole LeBron James thing. Not one, not two, not three, not four. Three shows. We got three shows today. Hello, Emo Nerd Girl. Of course, Hosea is also here. BR Justin. Yeah, so much. Exactly. There is so much to talk about. Of course, Acres of Movies is here as well. So, and I know you guys are excited about the Gwen Stacy fan casting later. So we'll get into that. But let's talk about this story, right? This is what we're here for. We do have quick hits, by the way, later on in the show. So we will get into some of the, more fun news, and then we'll have quick hits again later in DCU Daily. So quick hits everywhere. Okay, so let me break down how I'm gonna break all of this down. So Netflix has agreed to buy Warner Brothers for $82.7 billion, which I think is pretty much in the same range, if not higher, than what Disney paid for Fox a few years ago. Remember that big deal? So the way I figured we go about this is kind of dividing it up into, if you want to call them, chapters, right? So first I'm going to talk about the big news and what's going on with Warner Brothers and Netflix agreeing to the merger. I'm going to actually make this full screen to see if you guys can see it a little bit better. But yeah, so I'm going to start with just the general news. We'll talk about the summary details of what went down and who gets what, in this new merger news. Then from there, we're going to get into the lead up, which is basically what happened leading up to this happening overnight, literally overnight, this Thursday into Friday, this all went down. But it's been a week of news and a lot of, from Paramount sending letters to Warner Brothers responding to asking for a third round of bids, to then, ultimately Netflix being the chosen one. Then we'll talk about, well, why now? Why now does Netflix want to do this when they've basically not stepped in their foot, into the ring for the Fox deal, for many other, like, they didn't want to go after MGM. They could have bought so many other big media companies that have been up for sale and have been sold in recent times. They didn't buy Paramount, right, for example. So why now? Why go after Warner Brothers Discovery? And then, of course, we'll talk about the impact on theaters. Is Netflix gonna put these movies in theaters? Or are they gonna slowly starve us of Warner Brothers movies in theaters? Because they do say they're gonna keep them around for a little bit, but does that mean for the long term, is that the strategy they'll keep? So yeah, we'll talk about that, and then afterwards we'll get into a little bit of talking about, what about the licensing business. Now, this is a little more businessy, but trust me, this is relevant, right? Because I'll just give you the example of Ted Lasso, and we'll talk about it in more detail later. Ted Lasso is a show that is produced by Warner Brothers Television for Apple TV. They actually they still have the linear rights to it too. So if it ever ended up on like a TNT or a TBS, which I guess might not happen anyway now because those channels will be spun off. Like, that's something where, like, you gotta wonder, if Warner Brothers Television is producing it and now they're owned by Netflix, would they make shows for their rivals like an Apple TV Plus? So we'll talk about that as well. And then, of course, we'll talk about what is next. What's next for Warner Brothers Discovery? Their employees that work there, are they going to lose their jobs? What about Netflix? What do they want to do with the company? What is their vision? And then after that, we'll get into the quick hits. And hopefully through all of the talking, we'll have a pretty good idea of where all of this is headed. So let's start things off with the big news, of course, right? So the very first thing I want to get into here is the news, right? I'm sure you guys saw this. It's at this point, it's, you might as well, it's not breaking news technically, because it's been almost 12 or so hours since this has happened. But Warner Brothers Discovery, we know they've had this auction going on. You can call it an auction if you want to call it an auction, or a bidding war like that David Zaslav wanted. And they had asked for 2 rounds of bids and potentially a third one. There was a report about it this week. We'll get into that later. And we had Comcast, we had Netflix, and of course we had Paramount, all in the running. And well, ultimately it looks like Netflix won the fight. Netflix has now entered into a deal with Warner Brothers to acquire them for $82.7 billion. It's official. This all broke overnight. But if you were waking up this morning, this was like, oh my God, I had like a million notifications telling me about this. Now, one of the things in this deal is that the proposal that Netflix has agreed to with Warner Brothers includes a $5.8 billion breakup fee. And a breakup fee basically, is what it says it is, which is if Warner Brothers and Netflix aren't able to make this deal work if it gets blocked by the Department of Justice or any other regulators in Europe, or just for whatever reason doesn't work out. Because because while they've signed the initial proposal, it's not doesn't mean like they're one company yet. But if the deal doesn't go through, which Netflix expects 12 to 18 months for it to happen, so it's still a long way to go, then Netflix will have to pay $5.8 billion to Warner Brothers. That's a pretty hefty sum. I believe that Paramount's offer for a breakup fee as part of their proposal was like 5.3 billion, I think it was. So it was in the neighborhood, which by the way went up from 2.8 billion. So it's still a pretty big deal. There's also a termination fee involved, I think, for $2.8 billion, which is more, I think, if they decide to just terminate it mutually, or if Netflix decides to walk away, then it would be $2.8 billion. They would still, owe Warner Brothers. So Warner Brothers get paid out of this no matter what happens. It's just a matter of how much they get paid. If everything goes down the way it's expected to, it's $82.7 billion, which is a huge deal. I mean, and within the halls of Warner Brothers, they had been calling this project noble. I guess keep secrecy around the project for people who were working there who did not need to know about it, which is kind of funny. Project Noble. Anyway, so continuing to talk about the deal itself, let's get into the numbers a little bit more. So $82.7 billion, right? Like, we know Netflix had the biggest offer on the table. So according to Deadline here, Netflix's final offer accounted for $27.75 per share for Warner Brothers Discovery. And that leads to a value of $72 billion in equity. Now, I do believe of that $27.75 billion, or $27.75 per share, it wasn't all cash, right? So here in the Hollywood Reporter, they're telling us that this was mostly cash and then a little bit in shares. So of that 23.7 or 20 was it $27.75 per share valuation per share. Basically, anybody who owns Warner Brothers Discovery shares, they're going to get $23.25 in cash and then $4.50 in shares of Netflix common stock for every Warner Brothers Discovery common stock that they owned. Now, the plan still is to spin off the linear networks, so we'll talk about that a little bit later. But basically, all of that accounts for the company being valued at $72 billion in total equity value. And then the enterprise value is $82.7 billion. Now, you guys might be wondering what's the difference, because even I had to look this up, but some of you might know. So, I'm not going to insult your intelligence. The enterprise value equals the equity value plus the net debt, right? Now, the net debt, by the way, we'll break it down a little bit further. The net debt is the debt that the company carries, so the total debt. So here's the formula. I'll highlight it there. Let me see if I can zoom in a little bit on this so you guys can see it. There we go. So basically, this is how it all worked out. The equity value of Warner Brothers Discovery is $72 billion. That's what the shareholders value. That's the value of all the stocks being traded in the stock market. The enterprise value is $82.7 billion. Why? Because the enterprise includes total debt plus cash. So the debt is usually a negative number, and then the cash is being added on top. So the enterprise value ends up being actually, wait, hold on. Am I reversing these? Yeah, no, that's the correct order. So 72 billion. So, I mean, look, these are numbers for numbers' sake because it's not our money. But basically what that means is, $72 billion is like the true value, if you want to call it that, of the company. And then 82.7 billion is the value that includes the debt and all the cash on hand that Warner Brothers Discovery had. And so that's a pretty big deal. Like, that's a big deal. Yes, by the way, that is the show schedule. Thank you, Tony, for dropping that in there. Hunter Iggy, hello. John will be here later. Okay. Yeah, and then we'll get it. And enterprising, thank you for pointing that out. Hello. We'll get into the DC studios and what it means for DC as a whole. We'll talk about that too. But so when you look at that number, $82.7 billion with the equity value of $72 billion, whichever, let's just look at the bigger number, $82.7 billion. Clearly that value is derived from like the per share number that Netflix is paying for Warner Brothers Discovery. And that was apparently the highest number of any bidder that went into this. Like, apparently that's a higher offer than what Paramount put on the table and even what Comcast put on the table. We'll talk about that later. What I found a little bit funny about this is Well, this was a process where literally they kept a lot of these executives who were working at Comcast, Paramount, and Netflix on this offer working through Thanksgiving like nonstop. Like it's wild, right? And Netflix was still not the front runner for the longest time. Even they internally were like, Paramount's got the lead here. Like they had made 3 offers before we got into this formal process, and this is just it's a rare opportunity. But Paramount has all the pieces. They've got the administration on their side in the U.S. They even have lawyers on their team that were part of the previous administration of the current president. So like they've got all the pieces together, and they're offering something that was relatively competitive. And they even try to sweeten the pot by giving David Zaslav a potential co-CEO job after the merger potentially. But ultimately Netflix ends up winning it, and you could see here with the highest value of any company that was in the running. Now here's some other insight. This is a Financial Times, so I think this is like behind a paywall or whatever. So I have to like kind of dig into like make this article work. But essentially, this describes how it all went down. So here's what happened. Paramount was sending these 3 letters with like subsequent offers. They made 3 bids, right? Before the official process started, they had already sent 3 bids in. All of them were declined. And Warner Brothers board of directors realized this wasn't going to go away. Like this is something that they were going to have to like basically actively address. And to David Zaslav's credit, he had already hired like JP Morgan and stuff like to work on the potential sale. So they were already sort of like figuring out like how can we gauge the value of our company. But Paramount clearly was like, we want it, give it to us now, we want it. Now once this started the process internally at Warner Brothers, then they named the project, the code name for the project was apparently Project Sterling. Now, the Hollywood Reporter earlier mentioned Project Noble. So the Financial Times, I believe they're reporting more. Project Sterling is what they called it. If you worked at Warner Brothers and you heard of a Project Sterling, well, this is what it was. And if you heard of a Noble, that stood for Netflix, Wonder was for Warner, and then Prince was for Paramount. So far, I'm thinking they're talking about Wonder Woman for some reason. And then Charm was for Comcast. Tell me that doesn't sound like a Wonder Woman movie idea. Hello, Chuck. So it's kind of interesting. Now, I know some of you guys have questions about like what are Netflix actually getting out of this? They're getting the studios, Warner Brothers Studios, DC, which includes DC Studios. It includes New Line Cinema. It includes Warner Brothers Games. It includes all the IP like Harry Potter, Batman, and everything. It includes HBO Max. It doesn't include CNN. It doesn't include TNT, TBS, sports, TNT Sports. It doesn't include all the television networks. Those will still be spun off by Q3. So they pushed that back a little bit because initially Warner Brothers was hoping, to close that split transaction so that Discovery Global would spin off and become its own company with all the television networks that Warner Brothers doesn't want anymore. They wanted to do that by April of next year. Now it looks like their deadline for that is Q3 of 2026. So by like, August, September of 2026. So that's still going to happen. And then the remaining, everything else, the studios and the streaming side of things, including, of course, HBO and DC and everything, Warner Brothers Pictures, all of that is going to be what Netflix gets. And we'll get into that a little bit later because, it's a lot. That's still a lot. Clearly valued at $82.7 billion. That's a big number. One thing I also wanted to point out in this article is how, Netflix went about this. Because Netflix, they aren't one for big media mergers, right? They even were saying publicly, Greg Peters, one of the co-CEOs of Netflix, was like, big media mergers don't have an amazing track record. Like they were playing down their interest the same days when they were behind the scenes working on bids. So clearly they're like had to kind of, just put up a facade, kind of like almost like a Bruce Wayne saying, I don't know anything about like going out and fighting crime at night. I got a lady in my bed and stuff like that. And it's the opposite, right? Obviously, Batman's beating down people in Gotham and fighting crime. Clearly, I'm not equating that to what Netflix just did. I'm just saying like there was a duplicity to their claims publicly versus what they were doing in private. Whereas Paramount clearly, like David Ellison was like, we want Warner Brothers. Like aside from literally saying the words, they made it pretty clear. So. Now, of course, the auction did come to a head this week, and that's how we're here. Now, Netflix had not been the obvious front runner, but they, according to a person who was involved in sales negotiations, so like, look at this here. Netflix was ready to execute this deal in every material way. I will go through an article later that talked about that Warner Brothers had asked for like a third bid from everybody. But Netflix came in this week, and apparently Netflix had their shit together like neither Paramount or Comcast did. They had, over the course of 10 days, addressed literally every question and request from Warner Brothers. They had tightened up all the bits and bobs of all the nooks and crannies of the contracts and all the little pieces that needed to be put together. They had given the highest breakup fee of $5.8 billion in the deal, which is one of the largest ever. And then, of course, the board wanted a proposal they could sign immediately. So the Warner Brothers board wanted this to be done. Like, they were like, we want the money and we want to be out. And Netflix apparently, so think of it this way, like, not only was it a competitive bidding process, but maybe Paramount lost because they still wanted to negotiate. Like, according to this article, Paramount and Comcast, they didn't have a fully packaged deal on the table. They were still trying to negotiate certain terms, and apparently Netflix like just beat them to it. They were like, here's a deal, and Warner Brothers Discovery's board would like answer all these questions, make this work, what about this and that, and Netflix did it all. So Netflix had something that was fully executable on Thursday night, and minutes after the vote to approve the deal from both boards, the contracts were signed. So that's I guess the benefit of having your shit together, literally. And even though Netflix insiders thought that this was a long shot thing, apparently, at the end, it came down to just them having, all their stuff, all their ducks in a row, and now it's done. It's a done deal. Now, of course, David Zaslav, what his future is going to be of the company, we'll talk about that too. It looks like he's going to be staying on as the CEO of Warner Brothers under Netflix. And for the most part, according to Netflix's current, stance, they're not going to take the studio apart and strip it for pieces and integrate it into Netflix. It's going to mostly stay like its own thing within the larger Netflix. And they expect this deal to close within the next 12 to 18 months, right? So there's that. Now let's talk about the history of this deal and how we got here. So let me just briefly take a moment and actually get into your comments because I'm going at a fast pace. What a bombshell to drop at the end of this week, right, Chuck? I know completely. Angelica, hello, how are you doing? That's what I'm worried about if Gunn stays. What about Peter? Remember, Gunn doesn't want to be CEO without Peter Safran because he wants... Exactly. I hear you. So, okay. Well, we'll talk about that in a moment, because we do have some, we don't have definitive news, but we do have some news about like what might be going on with that. But we'll talk about it in a moment. Dark Elite Eric, hello, heyo. So, and I know the question is, will Gunn stay? As of right now, it looks like they're saying the people will be there, like they'll stay. Nobody is getting fired just yet. So... can I be the new Netflix head? I don't know. I don't know if I'm qualified enough, honestly. But and no slight to my right, well, whatever. Anyway, BR Justin saying Zaslav was also not high on selling to Paramount because the company has been unproven post Ellison takeover and relies on his Oracle fortune, which tanked in 2024 this year, well, last year. Yeah. Exactly, Justin. I think David Zaslav had some reservation, clearly, and this is where I'm going to go through the history of this, right? So let me actually see if I can walk us through. Again, we're doing this in little bits and pieces here, the chapters, if you want to call them that. So I'm going to go back in here and let's talk about where we are at now, right? So we have discussed what's happened so far. We have discussed like where things started and how the pieces got put together. We have also discussed, now we're going to discuss pretty much the history of this this auction. So let's talk about that for a moment, because I want to talk about the events of this week, because it looks like the alarm bells that were being sounded over at what do you want to call it, Paramount, they weren't for no reason after all, because Paramount seemed to know that they were about to lose. So if you guys remember, or if you were reading the news the last few days, we had gotten these two letters in the news. I think it was CNBC or Wall Street Journal broke this news, saying that on Monday Paramount sent a letter to Warner Brothers saying that there was an unfair process, and then by Wednesday they had sent a second letter, basically raising concerns about the whole process and calling it completely unfair, and saying that the basically implying that David Zaslav, Gunnar Weidenfels, who's the CFO of the company, who's going to be the CEO of the new Discovery Global spinoff, that those two guys and potentially other people were making decisions in this sale process with their future job prospects in mind, aka what job they will get after the merger versus doing what's best for the shareholders. So in hindsight, it looks like Paramount knew the writing on the wall, and so they were just like trying to do whatever they could to try to publicly, maybe in the public court of opinion, try to make something of it, or try to pull back, claw back into the deal, if you will, because clearly it looks like at the end, Netflix won, and it didn't happen, it did happen overnight last night, but like figuratively speaking, it didn't happen overnight. It looks like over the course of this past week, Netflix had edged ahead in the race, and Paramount was clearly calling foul publicly. So, it is chapter 2. There we go. We're in chapter 2 right now. Paramount was jumping around going cuckoo sour grapes, Tony. Exactly. And in hindsight, I don't blame him, because they were all calling foul in the public eye, but like, hey, maybe like get your shit together, and instead of negotiating on certain things, like put in an offer like Netflix did. Because I mean, look, you could say Netflix overpaid a little bit, but they were willing to do that to get the job done, because they knew how quickly Warner Brothers was moving on this. So Netflix was like, okay, we can pay up a little bit, maybe a few $1 billion. We've got the flexibility to do that, which, I mean, like the Paramount, the Ellisons have that money, but like, for whatever reason, they were nickel and diming them, and which again, nickel and diming in billions of dollars is something completely different from literally nickel and diming them. But still, it's a situation where you're looking at it, and maybe Paramount hesitated, and they lost the whole the whole deal. But they were calling foul, saying like the sale would entrench and extend Netflix's global dominance, that it would never get through regulatory approval, and so clearly they were desperate. So and at the end of the day, it looks like that they were calling foul publicly because they had no other means to do it, because Warner Brothers Discovery Board had made their mind up by that time. So I know that there was a report in the Wrap yesterday talking about that by yesterday, Warner Brothers Discovery had asked for a third round of bids. It looks like what they wanted was a complete proposal that they could sign, the board could sign. And Netflix was the only one of the three between Comcast and Paramount and Netflix. Netflix was the only one that had a proposal that was ready to go. And that's what ended up being the one that they picked. So there we go. Once again, Netflix just kind of jumped ahead, even though they probably didn't. Look, the Ellisons probably have deeper pockets, but at the end of the day, it looks like, Netflix had the package put together. So yeah, where is the money? Netflix is in the money. Exactly. And we knew even going into today, or even yesterday, that Netflix, even going into like Friday and Thursday and Friday, that Netflix, according to reporting, they had made the highest bid. So if you go off of the idea now in hindsight that they had all the pieces together, they had the highest bid, I mean, I understand why Warner Brothers Discovery went with them. Is it maybe the best decision? That's a different question. We'll talk about that later. But for the time being, it looks like, that meant that Netflix was the chosen one. And we heard the news late last night. I shared this on our community post section that Netflix and Warner Bros. Discovery had entered into an exclusive negotiating window where they were just talking to each other, and basically Comcast and Paramount were out. And it was just going to be the two of them trying to, finalize the last bits of details. And that's what happened. Netflix apparently offered around $28 a share for Warner Bros. Discovery, mostly in cash. We talked about this, right? So the final number is $27.75, which is higher than all the publicly available numbers from the previous Paramount bids. But also, you got to remember, Paramount was buying all of Warner Brothers Discovery. So the number they were offering might have been like similar to Netflix, but they were doing it for not just Warner Brothers, the studios and streaming, but also the TV networks. They were thinking the TV network company that's going to be spun off next year is going to be worth like $2 to $3, a share. So they were thinking, basically with that whole number they were giving, like $27 more or less. Of that $2 to $3, I think Paramount's estimation was $2. Warner Brothers thought it'd be $3, so they were kind of off on that number. And ultimately, when you look at that versus $27.75 minus the networks, clearly that's more money. So, yeah, ultimately Netflix had the best offer on the table in terms of the money overall, and then also it looks like board of directors thought that they would be the best shepherds of the company and that there might be the least amount of overlap in terms of like people losing jobs. There will still be some layoffs. So we'll talk about that too. But let's talk about the why now, right? And actually, before we talk about so that's where we are now in terms of the process. We're in chapter 3, if you want to call it that, the why now chapter of the video. So we know Netflix has not really gone for these big deals for a long time. Like they skipped the Fox thing. They didn't care for MGM. They have sat on the sidelines for Paramount. So why go for Warner Brothers now, right? Why now? And well, Netflix co-chiefs explained their reasoning today. So let's talk about that for a moment. We know they have Ted Sarandos and Greg Peters. Those are the two men in charge. And well, when it came down to why, even though they publicly had been saying for not just recently, but for years that, mergers don't usually work in Hollywood. And well, ultimately on the call with the media and with the shareholders today, Ted Sarandos said, I know some of you are surprised that we are making this acquisition, and I certainly understand why. Over the years, we have known to be builders, not buyers. But, it's just a rare opportunity. Like they just couldn't pass this up. And then, when they went on to say, Ted Sarandos did in this case, I think this is a good story because this is a healthy, growing business that is going to help another business grow in a more healthy way and open up audiences reach that these creators have never had before, aka Netflix's 300 million subscribers. And then Ted Sarandos says, I think the opportunities are great for American production and for the entertainment industry as a whole to be much more active than it has been over the last several years. It's a lot of puff, like it's a lot of talking. What does it really mean? We'll talk about that later too. But for the moment, I just wanted to take a chance and look at what you guys are saying. Reboot Friends, recast Chandler with Owen Wilson. I don't think they're ever going to reboot Friends because of how much Friends is worth, and also just the nostalgia of it. I don't think anybody's asking for that. I don't even know how you would reboot Friends, considering like it's for a particular time, right? So I don't know how you go about like making it something completely different for the here and the now. It wouldn't be this. It wouldn't feel the same. Sergeant Giratina asking, do you think that when Netflix merges with Warner Bros. Discovery, will they still allow Man of Tomorrow to go into filming? And if they cancel over their one-off movie policy? Okay, so Man of Tomorrow. So I'm going to get into that in a moment. So let's actually get into the what it means part of the conversation. And I'm going to see if I can pull that up here. So stick with me. So hang with me for a moment. But the short answer to your question is no. They're not going to cancel Man of Tomorrow because it's too far along for it to happen at this point. So I don't think it's going to be a problem, because it's too far along in production. It's already past pre-production. So at this point, I don't think, they're going to be canceling it. I know you're thinking like Batgirl, they shot it, then canceled it. That was completely different. But let's take a quick look at, everything that we've got here in terms of what Warner Brothers, is going to be giving to Netflix as part of this sale. So let's take a quick look at that. And then as part of that, we'll talk about DC as well. So as part of the assets that Warner Brothers is selling to Netflix or merging with Netflix, you've got the television group, you've got the Warner Brothers Pictures group, you've got the global enterprises, which includes all the sales stuff and distribution and the merchandising and all that digital products, aka they got video games. HBO is also something that's going to be sold. Then CNN is going to get spun off next year. All the Warner Brothers Discovery networks will get spun off, and all the Discovery Sports are going to get spun off. So what stays behind, though, are Warner Brothers games, the global streaming services, including HBO Max and HBO, like HBO. And then, you know, you got DC Entertainment, that's going to stay. But yeah, so a bunch of, you know, the television stuff is going away, but the rest is going to stick around. Now, as far as like the IPs that Warner Brothers will continue to control uh, under the Netflix banner now, because they'll all be one company, if this deal, you know, goes through all the way, you look at the list. I mean, come on now. You got Friends, you got Oceans, Gremlins, Evil Dead. I'm not gonna go through every single one of them, but like you got Beetlejuice, Matrix, DC Comics. Like that should be like a bigger word in general because of how big and valuable that is. Adult Swim, you know, the Hanna-Barbera cartoons they've got, like Tom and Jerry. You got the Jetsons, Casablanca. Like I don't know if they're gonna reboot that. That might be worth a reboot. Harry Potter, of course, that TV show is going to be now potentially something that we might get to see under Netflix in some way. It might stay on HBO, but like, how does that work? We'll figure out. Um, I don't know if I would do that Acres of Movies. Maybe he would. Maybe he would. Yeah. The James Gunn's DC is going to stay largely the way it is. I don't think that's changing anytime soon, simply because like it's just it's just not a situation where like they want to rock the boat for something that's not like this deal is not going to be permanent and finalized till potentially 2028. So I don't think we're in a situation where anything that's already in pre-production or production or post-production has anything to worry about, because it's going to be business as usual up until, you know, probably late 2026, early 2027 at the earliest. So I don't think we're going to be in that situation where we have to worry about that. And that's why I think everything that DC currently has going is going to be fine. So Darkly Eric asking, how does HBO Max work when someone else is going to buy HBO and Cinemax? Right. So far they haven't mentioned what they're going to do other than saying they might look to do a bundle potentially. Like they might look to bundle out HBO Max with Netflix. They might look to merge it over time. They were pretty vague about it for now. Although, look, the chances are this has all been figured out in the background, right? Because that's why the deal was made. They made it because they know what, like the Warner Brothers board of directors know what Netflix has in store and what their plan for them. But let's keep talking. Let's stay on the movie side of the conversation for now, because I'll get into the streaming thing in a moment. For the time being, though, it looks like HBO Max is going to stay HBO Max, just to answer your question. Over time, they're going to bundle it probably, and then long term, they might look to merge it. But they did also say there's a lot of overlap in the subscriber base between HBO and Netflix. So they don't necessarily see it as like, you know, add 130 million subscribers of HBO Max with 300 million of Netflix and you get 430 million. Chances are you're going to get probably something that's like, you know, maybe 400 million at most kind of thing, because there is a significant overlap. Like, for example, I subscribe to Netflix, I subscribe to HBO Max. Once they're the same company, do I want to be paying for two separate things? Like in terms of creating value for the customer that Netflix wants to do? That's not value for me. I'm like, give me just one service. Like, why are you giving me two? Maybe I can pay a little bit more for the combined one. Maybe I don't. Like, that's how I would see it, and I'm sure that's how a lot of people would see it. But for the time being, what you're likely going to see is more HBO content going over to Netflix, even more than what they've already been doing over the past couple of years. So that will be interesting to see. I don't. Well. Maybe Universal could, but that would be a Netflix thing because Netflix owns the Stranger Things. So if they want to license that to Universal Parks, that would be interesting. But yeah, one of the things that was brought up as a possibility, which again we don't know for sure yet, but Tony, you're making a good point here. Hulu just moved to be basically housed under Disney Plus. So there is a very good chance that long term, what might end up happening is the Netflix app might get a bit of an overhaul, and then they will have HBO built into Netflix. And so instead of being though like all one big pot, what's likely going to happen, unless Netflix, this is a Netflix decision, right? Because they own the company now, or will be once this deal closes. They might make it so that HBO Max is like an add-on. So like when you play Call of Duty and then you need to buy like packs and deals, like you need to buy stuff that's an add-on top of the game that you already have paid for. It might be something like that where you might get Netflix Premium and then you might get Netflix HBO Max upgrade and pay extra for it. Or maybe if Netflix thinks that's too complicated, or it might end up in a situation that's not going to be very consumer friendly, or people might just rebel against the idea, they might just raise the prices of Netflix as a whole and then have HBO Max just be like integrated completely. So you know how Disney Plus has a Hulu but like section and Marvel and Lucasfilm, it might become a situation where Netflix then has a DC button and section. Then they also will have maybe just an HBO one, even though that's not how they operate. Like that's a very Disney Plus thing that then Warner Brothers kind of picked up for HBO. Netflix just is like, we got everything, fine, like we'll show you what you like. They might have to change that up a little bit because now you got HBO. HBO is everything Netflix isn't, and Netflix is everything that HBO is. So now that it's all going to be one thing, they probably want to go about it in a way where they need to make some changes to the Netflix app if they want to include HBO in it natively. Like if HBO Max, the application, the streaming service completely disappears. So yeah, user X6679 saying IMAX has already come out saying that Warner Brothers is under contract to release its films till 2029. Yep. And Netflix will honor those deals. And speaking of which, here's the headline in Variety. Netflix says Warner Brothers movies will remain in theaters, but Windows, this is Ted Sarandos saying, Windows will evolve to be much more consumer friendly. So think about this. While he said that clearly we will honor the contracts that we currently have, he thinks that over time, the windows, the release windows, basically how long a movie stays in theaters for, will evolve, and his implication here is to be shorter than what they are today. We already think it's way too short, right? We talk about it all the time, how movies go out on streaming way too quickly, and that means that people just don't get either a chance to go see the movie enough in theaters or at all. But also people are just at this point trained to just wait. Like, the whole idea of I'll wait for it to come on streaming. Like it wasn't more than 5-10 years ago that if you said that, you'd be waiting for like a year and a half, especially for like the really big movies. Like if Barbie came out before pandemic, for example, and you didn't for whatever reason go see it in theaters because you wanted to wait for it to come on streaming, you might have waited for a year or more. But despite the fact that it was $1 billion+ movie and the biggest movie of its year, it was on streaming literally months within its release. That's not something that used to happen. Like that's literally like the opposite. Like for example, The Fall Guy, I know it was a flop, but it didn't take them even a week. Like literally they gave it one weekend, Universal did, and then they put it on streaming. I remember that. I was like, wait, isn't it like, didn't it come out last week and they already got it on like Peacock? I'm like, oh God. Like those extreme examples are what's killing the theatrical industry. And right now, Netflix, look, Ted Sarandos is walking towing the party line of we're going to be keeping our, movies, Warner Brothers movies in theaters. We're going to be keeping our Netflix movies, on Netflix the way we are going about it, and at the end of the day, that will stay the way that it is for now, but maybe down the road it will evolve. And you can read that as basically over time, they're going to be putting out probably Warner Brothers movies in theaters, but for not as long and maybe fewer of them. And now that's a speculation because I'm not in Greg Peters and Ted Sarandos' head. I haven't read the documentation, but that's something where, there's going to be a big difference. BR Justin saying the difference between Hulu being inserted into Disney Plus is that HBO Max is far more respected a platform for its original programming. HBO name value is strong enough to maintain its own app. Yeah, absolutely it is. Absolutely it is. I mean, look, I think HBO, like I said, HBO is the pinnacle of television, like premium television. And Netflix has always been sort of the opposite. They're like, Netflix is like a cable subscription all on its own. And that's how they've always marketed themselves. Whereas HBO is like, we are HBO. We are home box office. You get the very best of television and only that. So merging them together would be a different prospect than what, Hulu would going into Disney is in that sense. Even though Hulu, they already have FX on Hulu there and stuff like that. So there is some prestige television. But for example, the like if you look at just the movie libraries of Netflix and Warner Brothers Discovery, Netflix has roughly like 4,000 some odd movies total right now. By adding the movie library of Warner Brothers and everything they just bought within Netflix's library, they're going to have a 52% increase in the number of movies because Warner Brothers brings in like 2,000 some odd movies. And you might be thinking, how does Netflix already have more movies than Warner Brothers? Because of course they've licensed a ton of them, they've bought a ton of them. So it's not like they own all 4,000. A lot of those are licenses that will expire over time, but they do have a lot of their own stuff they've bought over the years. But they've bought them in bulk, right? Like almost in bulk. It's like you go to a Costco, you get 4,000 movies. That's Netflix movies. But then you go to Warner Brothers is like you go to a high end store, like I don't know, like Blockbusters don't exist, so the analogy breaks down, but I'm like, it's not like you're going to a Costco. Maybe it's more like you're going to, I don't know, Whole Foods. If you're in the US, like, you know what that is. And you're buying like food that's organic and like it's more expensive and shit and supposed to taste better, or does taste better. I don't shop at Whole Foods very often. I also don't shop at Costco very often, but that's the point. It's like it's more curated. So, and we talked about all the different IP that Warner Brothers has already. So, um, but that all aside, hello Kevin, saying Trump administration isn't going to stop this Netflix Warner Brothers merger. So far, I can't tell you which way it's gonna go because they haven't been very loud about it. We did get like some lawmakers speaking out against the idea because they think that it's gonna be like a big monopoly because it is the biggest streamer in the world, buying like the third biggest streamer in the world. That's obviously, anti-competition. You can look at it that way. Game Freakness saying, I just finished writing a film and when it comes out, it will definitely be in theaters. So I won't work with Warner Brothers if they don't have movies in theaters anymore or for less than 30 days. Yeah, yeah, exactly. Um, Good on you, man. If you can get a movie out in theaters, then yeah, I mean, go to all the other studios, you know. Um, yeah, look, an enterprising that could happen. Like Netflix could have a menu where you have HBO Hub and you have a DC Studios Hub, and then you could have I don't know, like a Stranger Things Hub or whatever if they decide to do that. But as of right now, they keep saying, that they're committed to releasing movies theatrically, even though it seems like most of Hollywood doesn't believe them, that, them being Netflix. Because Cinema United CEO put out a statement today, basically saying the same thing. Um, that they weren't convinced by it. The proposed acquisition of Warner Brothers by Netflix poses an unprecedented threat to the global exhibition business. I understand that. I mean, look, in general, like this is a point this article makes, and a bunch of other articles I've been reading today. If you think about it, anytime one independent distributor of movies is taken out of the market because now Warner Brothers and Netflix are the same entity, there's one less buyer of movies. So for a lot of independent producers, a lot of producers who work with studios, have deals with studios, now there's one less place they can go to. Similar to when, Disney bought Fox, there was no longer 20th Century Fox and a Disney. It was Disney and 20th Century Studios as one entity. Like they can house their stuff in different, parts of the company. Like you still have all these studios like Searchlight Pictures, and you have 20th Century Studios, and you have Walt Disney Pictures. You have, of course, Marvel Studios, but it's all under one big conglomerate. So it's all ultimately, one house. Kind of like with, Universal Pictures and Focus Features is all one thing. Now Warner Brothers and Netflix will be all one thing. And anytime that happens, that's not good for movie makers who want to get their movies out there. So I think that's the problem. Dark Elite Eric saying, how is that monopoly, aka Netflix and HBO Max, but Skydance buying Paramount, Paramount Plus, CBS, and WB HBO Max is not? Good question. You know what? And I'm going to get into that in a few minutes because that is a very good question, and that's something that I'm sure will be argued in the courts because it looks like Paramount isn't quite given up on this yet. But at the same time, I could tell you that there's gonna be a regulatory process. There might even be a lawsuit because remember when what was it? It was I believe it was the yeah, the last time Warner Brothers sold itself was to, they were Time Warner. Well, actually, last time before last time, when AT&T was buying Time Warner, you know, it was about like 10 years ago now. If you guys remember, what happened then is they got sued by the Department of Justice, and as a result of that, it took like an extra year for that to all go through. Ultimately, it went through, and you know they made it happen. But and throughout that whole process, like not only was it costly for both all the companies, but they were trying to talk about how like this would be a monopoly in the media industry business. Turns out, like at the end of the day, the judge wasn't convinced, so that will be a question again. Probably it depends on if the Department of Justice want to push it that far, because back when that Time Warner AT&T merger was happening, it was the first Trump administration. So so now it's again the same people, but I guess even worse this time, are like in charge. So I have a feeling that we might be in a similar situation. Did AT&T just buy Spectrum? I don't. I will get it if that is true. I will get into that on DCU Daily. Yeah, boo-hoo, Paramount. Figure drawing, yes. Yeah, Paramount, it looks like, got the short end of the stick on a bidding war that they started. But let's talk about the TV side of things, right? We just talked about the impact on movie theaters. I want to talk about what this deal for Netflix buying Warner Brothers means for Warner Brothers Television. You might be wondering, like, so what? Like, now everything they make is gonna be part of Netflix, right? Like, or you know, part of whatever Netflix HBO combination streaming service is gonna look like. But you got to remember, Warner Brothers doesn't just make stuff for HBO and HBO Max. They make stuff for a lot of other outlets and a lot of that includes television networks. Like they make Abbott Elementary, which has won a lot of Emmys. They make, and that airs on ABC. They make Georgie and Mandy's First Marriage, like that airs on CBS. The Big Bang Theory aired on CBS. Those are all owned by Warner Brothers. The Bachelor franchise that airs on ABC, those are the distributors, but you know ultimately Warner Brothers owns them. Brilliant Minds, what is that, an NBC? Like that's a Warner Brothers show. You look at all of these here. Peacemaker, sure, that's on HBO Max, but what about All American? Like that's on the CW, which is now no longer majority owned by Warner Brothers. They only have like a 5% share. So will they still keep supplying programming to all these other outlets? You know, not to mention like something like Leanne, which by the way I think that becomes a little bit easier because Leanne goes to Netflix, and now that's technically an internal transaction because Netflix owns Warner Brothers. So, you know, or Untamed is another one. But I wanted to kind of point out one other example, which I think is, or a couple of other examples. Warner Brothers Discovery distributes TV shows to Roku and Tubi. I'm sure you guys remember, like when Westworld went off the air, they took it off HBO, and what they ended up doing is they signed a deal with, you know, with Roku, with Tubi, so you can go watch Westworld. It wasn't going to be on HBO anymore or HBO Max, but you can see it on, you know, Roku, Tubi, and like they even had their 24/7 channels. What about now? Like, will they still have those? I mean, once those deals expire, like the ones that are currently in place, I bet you Netflix just says, we're just going to put this stuff on Netflix. We don't need to go put this stuff on these other streaming services. Like, what's the point of doing that? Like, we are Netflix. We want to create value for our paying customers. And also, like something like a Ted Lasso. Guys, remember, Ted Lasso is produced by Warner Brothers. It's an Apple TV Plus original show, but it's a show that's made by Warner Brothers, and they own the rights to it. Like Universal Television is like a partial partner. They're more like a passive partner because they don't really do any work on it. They just own the original IP, the idea of Ted Lasso, because it came from NBC Sports Premier League coverage years ago. But like Warner Brothers TV makes the show. Will they keep making? I mean, obviously they have at least one more season in the works, and that probably is safe. But what about past season 4? What about the rights to the show after it's done airing? Like, think about it this way: like once the show is done, it used to go into syndication, and so that's why you would, you know, get it, like, you know, that's how you get Law and Order on USA Network, for example, right? Even though it originally aired on broadcast television. But with something like a Ted Lasso now in the streaming world, Apple would want to keep the show in their library, but like now Warner Brothers TV is owned by Netflix. Like, how does that all work? Like, if they break their deals, like, will Apple just buy it out? Will Netflix even let Apple buy it out? Wouldn't Netflix want to have Ted Lasso in their library? Like they're saying here, HBO's value will be unlocked by the merger. Netflix co-CEO Greg Peters says the bundled details are still to be decided. So we talked about that already. But like, Ted Lasso, among many other shows like that Warner Brothers makes right now. I'm like those like do they all end up on Netflix in the long run? Like are those part of the deal? So yeah, I mean, Darkly Derek, that would be the thing. I don't look, the deals that are currently in place, the contracts they will probably honor, but then after those are done, like in a few years' time, chances are you're not gonna find. I mean, you're gonna find Westworld probably on Netflix. You're not gonna find it on Tubi, aka you need to be paying for Netflix to watch Westworld versus just downloading the Tubi app and watching it for free. So those kind of things will change most likely, unless Netflix decides to not. But I don't see how that will be in their interest. They want to keep things simple. They still want to keep things simple where they can. And I think in some of these other like distribution deals, a lot of these pieces will probably fall away. F1 is an instance of Warner Brothers Discovery or Warner Brothers Pictures specifically distributing a movie for Apple Studios or Apple Original Films. Now, if they're a part of Netflix and they're a direct competitor of Apple TV, will Apple go to Warner Brothers Pictures to distribute their movies in the future? Probably not. Like, that's another thing. So EPR Justin saying Netflix has plenty of content, but what they lack is generational IPs that complement their new ROI focused approach, and that they just acquired that before they licensed it. Now they control it. Exactly. Guys, just remember when Netflix lost the rights when the beginning of the when the streaming war started. Netflix had a deal for Friends, and that deal expired. And then Warner Brothers was like, "We've got an HBO Max coming out. We want to put our Friends show, which is one of the most popular library shows, on our HBO Max service." Like, The Office went off Netflix and went on Peacock. Like, all of these shows, like, that people, that's all they watched on Netflix for a long time, remember? And then they got the rights to Seinfeld. But now, I mean, will Friends be back on Netflix? Like, will you be able to watch Friends on Netflix again down the road? What about like Game of Thrones? Like, I mean, you've got the current shows that are running on HBO, but I bet you're more likely to see like the original Game of Thrones show on Netflix. Probably not in the too distant future. Like, so. And then you also have the Oceans movie that is in the works right now, and George Clooney said that they were going to be filming it next year. So is that one of those projects that ultimately ends up on Netflix instead of being in theaters? Like, these are all questions worth asking. Hey, Steven, how are you doing today? Thanks for joining in live. Hit the like button while you guys are watching. It's gonna be a long night of shows. We're just getting started here. John's not sleeping, Steven. John will be on later when we do DCU Daily and then when we do Fancast Friday. This is one of 3 shows today. Now, before we finish up talking about TV shows, I did want to mention this was news yesterday, and you could see here like the Night Agent. That's another one of those shows that just got renewed, kind of like what we were talking about Ted Lasso a moment ago. One of the things that Ted Sarandos and Greg Peters said is that one of the rationale for this deal being a good thing to get it to approval process, they were saying that they're going to be creating more American jobs and they want to bring more production, stateside, and that being probably one of the ways in which they try to get an approval from the current administration, which wants to be very America first, even though I don't know if they actually are. So all of that said, yeah, that's the schedule, by the way. Thank you, Tony, for putting that up. But yeah, so with that rationale in place, like the Night Agent is one of those shows now, which is using the Pitt model. Remember, the Pitt is a show that HBO is now making it with the effort and the goal to make it so that every year you have a new season and each episode doesn't cost as much as like your traditional Netflix or HBO show. So the budgets are a little bit lower and they're trying to make a few more episodes per season and then release a new season every year rather than waiting 2 to 3 years. The Night Agent is another one of those shows that is doing that. And look, if you don't believe Netflix about the idea that they're trying to, bring more production stateside and, make more American jobs, one of the reasons why and how the Night Agent got greenlit for season 3 and now season 4 is because they just got, I think, like, was it 31 million? Let me see. So yeah, here it goes. $31.6 million in tax credits from California's new tax credit program for season 4. So after filming most of season 3, I believe they filmed it in Turkey, and then I think they filmed it like overseas. Was it the UK or something? The next season is going to be filmed pretty much all in the US, in California and Los Angeles. So in some ways, Netflix is hopefully going to follow through and do have a similar approach for HBO shows where they do produce more stuff, in the United States. So maybe that will work to their benefit, and maybe that's one of the reasons why they feel confident that they will get regulatory approval and not, have to worry about that, and or be sued for it, or like have the deal basically be stopped by the regulators, whether it's in the US or in Europe. Although, the Europeans will not care about whether you're filming in the US or not, but they will care about other things. So we will talk about that in a moment too. But let's get into the next part of the show, which is what's next. Like, what's next? Now that all this has happened, we've talked about the impact on theaters. We've talked about the licensing impact for all the television shows like that Warner Brothers makes for other distributors. Are they still going to be making those? Well, there is still, despite all the optimism around having this deal go through, there is still a lot of regulatory pressure and potential anti-competition issues that they might have to get past. So that's something we'll have to worry about. Like, this is a deal which makes Netflix firmly like the dominant force in the streaming world. I was reading, I think, one of the analysts talking about this deal were saying, like, look, this is the end of the streaming wars. Netflix won. Everybody else lost. That's where we're at. And I can't, you can't help but agree. And you do have the Trump factor here with the whole deal, like the idea that the president wanted the Ellisons to win. Those are his friends. So, like, will he be more likely to, like, say no, or like find ways for his Department of Justice to sue and then make sure that this deal doesn't go through? That's still a question. And we'll talk about how Netflix can potentially make an argument for why this, is completely okay and that they should let this deal pass through. Enterprising asking, I'm curious how they would handle Dynamic Duo or other experiments. That's a good question, because that's a project that's not due to come out for a few years more. I would be concerned that might go from being a theatrical release to being a release on streaming. But it depends on how long this deal takes to close. So I'm not quite sure. That's a great question, because that's the kind of thing that I could see going from being a theatrical thing to going straight to Netflix, or having a shorter theatrical window and then, it goes to Netflix, or goes to HBO if that's still its own thing separately. Like, for example, if you guys know or remember, we've talked about it in the past. Well, after buying MGM, give me a second. Excuse me. Amazon didn't kill the streaming service that MGM had, which was called Epix. They rebranded it to MGM Plus, and they still have Prime Video, and then MGM Plus is like the more premium streaming service. So they have a smaller library, but they still exist. You could say Amazon Prime is still far superior in terms of the variety of programming they have. But they have a bunch of stuff on MGM Plus too, and that still kept on going. So will Netflix maybe just keep HBO Max its own thing? That's very possible. And maybe those experiments end up going, like, the stuff that feels like it's more prestige and more rare and not as appealing to a wider audience might still end up going to, HBO instead. And of course, HBO will still have, hopefully, like The Last of Us and all those other shows. BR Justin saying Netflix acquiring WBD wouldn't just be the end of the streaming wars that they were already winning. They'd be upgrading to a media conglomerate. Yeah, absolutely. The whole build versus buy situation. Yeah. Oh, yeah. The bottle just disappears in the background. Challenges went to an MGM Plus before it dropped on Prime. Exactly. So Amazon has kind of got like a bit of a ecosystem built around that. So maybe Netflix looks at that and says, maybe we can do something similar with HBO. Even though, again, the scale and prestige of HBO is completely different than Amazon had with MGM Plus. So, sorry, guys. interesting weather going on around here. So I don't know if I have a cold or not, but I do have a something on my nose. But anyway, yeah, David Zaslav does seem to be staying on board post merger. I mean, him and Ted Sarandos are friends. They were at like a UFC event recently, so yeah, I don't think he's gonna be going anywhere anytime soon. Is this good news for DC or bad news? Okay, I think it's good news in the near term because James Gunn and Peter Safran aren't going anywhere. And we'll talk about like one of the reasons why it might not have been such a good outcome for them if Paramount bought them, because Paramount are more willing to, like, their leadership team at Skydance now is much more heavy-handed, and they're more willing to go over the heads of heads of studio heads to make stuff happen, like what they did with the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, like canceling the last Ronin and then deciding we're going to do a new live action one and giving it to the same guy who makes the Sonic movies. The Sonic movies are good. Do we need the same approach for Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles is another thing. But they did that by going over the heads of, like, the Paramount studios at the time and stuff. And like David Ellison kind of calls the shots, and it's very heavy-handed in his approach. David Zaslav has been very hands-off for the most part. So I'm guessing that with Netflix, based on all the information available, that kind of approach will continue because David Zaslav will still be in charge of Warner Brothers Studios. So I think in that sense, it's better than if Paramount were in there, because Paramount would be more likely to like greenlight projects that go behind the back of James Gunn, and at which point you're like, okay, so why am I the studio head if you're going to make decisions for me anyway, kind of thing, kind of like what was happening with DC during the age of the DCEU. So yeah. Yeah, it's been crazy cold weather up here in the Northeast, man. I'm not in Canada, Tony, but like it's still been cold down here. So hey, it's Enterprising's mom's birthday today, and the third reminder that yes, it is your birthday tomorrow. What an amazing 2 days every year, huh? Okay, 36. That's awesome, man. Congratulations, Enterprising. So it's your mom's birthday today, and it's your birthday tomorrow. That is amazing. Happy birthday to your mom today, and then another happy early birthday to you for tomorrow. What does this mean for the new development for the new Gremlins movie? Okay, so that's a good example, Acres of Movies. So Stacy, here's the thing. The Gremlins movie is meant to come out, what, in 2028? I think they gave it a date. That, I think, is going to be safe. Anything that's scheduled for 2029 beyond, like we talked about, maybe the Wonder Woman movie, maybe the DCU Batman movie, those are the movies that we were worried about. Like, for example, the IMAX release deal that they had, the distribution deal with IMAX of Warner Brothers. One of you guys mentioned it was 2029. They have until 2029 contractually to continue releasing movies in IMAX. Warner Brothers does. So so more than likely, a lot of their current distribution deals with theaters are going to be expiring by the end of this decade. And so movies that are on the slate for Warner Brothers to come out around that time or later, those I'd be worried about if they're going to end up making it, into the theaters, or if they will end up going on streaming, because by that time we will know whether Netflix is combining HBO Max and merging it into the same streaming service, or if they're, keeping HBO as its own separate thing, or doing some kind of bundle that is a permanent solution rather than just being a temporary solution. And yeah, future Looney Tunes projects. Here's the thing. I think in any situation of Warner Brothers being sold, Looney Tunes and HBO and Looney Tunes and Tom and Jerry and stuff, they were probably gonna get a bit of an upgrade and in their prospects, because under HBO, David Zaslav didn't see that kind of family and kids programming as a big priority. They were looking at that as like, we are HBO. There's a reason why they made the colors of the app all black and white instead of being like this purple color, because they're like, we're prestigious, we're HBO. We don't do Looney Tunes, we do Game of Thrones. With Netflix, they will be like, we want more Looney Tunes, we want more Tom and Jerry. Like, I think even to Paramount, they probably would have done that. So I think in that instance, even with Comcast, they would have, because they want to merchandise the shit out of it. They want to do everything. They want to have those kind of programmings, elements that IP fill their content library. So I think it's a good omen for those, like, older animated projects, the Hanna-Barbera projects. I think you're more likely to see more of them. The question will become the quality of the projects, because according to reporting, as of right now, Netflix plans to add the $16 billion that Warner Brothers spends every year on their content, whether it's TV shows or movies, and they're just gonna like add it on top of what they're spending themselves. They're not planning on cutting down on the amount of money that Warner Brothers will be spending. So we know that Warner Bros. Will continue to do what they're doing, but now that Netflix will own that IP, it's more likely that they say maybe Warner Brothers, animation can make us a new well, they're doing a Jetsons movie anyway, but maybe like a live action one, but maybe we can do a new animated Jetsons show. Maybe we can reboot and do a new Flintstones animated show. But instead of making it for Warner Brothers per se, Warner Brothers Animation can make it for Netflix. That's more likely to happen, and now it won't be a situation where they're where they're licensing it out to somebody and that it's an external party like a Tubi. Instead, it would be an internal transaction. So it's like, you're paying, your company's paying itself really, and the money just gets moved around internally. The video games, we know that the Warner Brothers video games library and all the different, like the Mortal Kombat, the DC games, and all the pillars that they announced recently, that's all going to Netflix as well. And David Zaslav did say at the town hall meeting with their employees today that chances are a lot of those people will stay in place, because you got to remember David Zaslav's current, ownership, that leadership team, they put all of that together. They basically blew all of Warner Brothers games apart and then put the pieces back together again into the current Warner Brothers games studio. So David Zaslav and Ted Sarandos are friends, and Zaslav is not going anywhere. So what I'm thinking is going to happen most likely, and that's what Zaslav seems to have implied, and even the Ted Sarandos and Greg Peters of Netflix, is they're going to keep those guys around. Why? Because Netflix doesn't have a similar gaming studio of their own. It would be one thing if EA was buying Activision and all of a sudden you're like, we kind of do similar stuff. Like, do we all need to be here? Netflix doesn't have distribution arm like Warner Brothers for distributing movies, like home, whether it's on Blu-ray or theatrically, which we'll see if they get rid of those, and that's a big red flag for theatrical distribution for Warner Brothers. But like, they also don't have a gaming studio now. So it's one of those things where there's not an overlap. You can't achieve efficiency by getting rid of the Warner Brothers game studio because Netflix doesn't have one. So unless Netflix doesn't care for it, which doesn't seem to be the case, I think they're going to keep Warner Brothers games around. And so any future game that comes out through Warner Brothers games is going to still be, worked on by the people that work there now. What's more likely to happen now is, like, if they want to make a Stranger Things video game, that could be something that Warner Brothers games could work on, because now they're all under the same company. Whereas it would probably have been like, they could have gone to different developers in the past. But like a Batman game, or a Mortal Kombat game, those will all still be a part of the Warner Brothers games, and that will still be around. So to answer that question, that's a good question. If I was starting a Hanna-Barbera cinematic universe, I might start with, and this is underrated, it's probably not a good idea, but I would probably start with the Wacky Races. I want to see the Wacky Races in live action, and then I might like add to it from there, like add the Looney Tunes or Tom and Jerry and stuff. Yeah. Oh, poor Snyder, Moser player. Yeah, Zack Snyder's been getting out of the Netflix business of late, and I guess just at the time when Netflix was getting its hands on DC. So, yeah, I mean, for anybody who's hoping for the Snyderverse to come back, Zack Snyder's not really working with Netflix anymore, and Netflix just bought DC, so too bad. Yeah. Yeah. All right. So, in terms of the backlash, in terms of what's going to happen next, a lot of people are sounding the alarm in Hollywood about like what's going to happen with the future of of Warner Brothers, because Netflix doesn't really release movies in theaters, right? Oh, by the way, Dark Lead Eric, AEW, I think that they'll be fine, their current deal at least. But remember, all the television networks will get spun off next year. So AEW will then have to deal with TNT, TBS under Discovery Networks, and they will not be dealing with, HBO Max and Netflix. So if anything, AEW events may no longer be on HBO Max after next year. Kind of like what's been going on with with NBC Universal splitting with Versant. They kept Peacock, so they still have like the streaming WWE deal. But then I think SmackDown goes on USA Network, so that is now separate with Versant. So those will, yeah, so to address that. But anyway, anonymous A-listers. This included supposedly a bunch of producers and some actors who, actors can also be producers. So a bunch of A-listers who did not name themselves sent Congress a letter against the Netflix WBD acquisition, saying that the streamer would hold a noose around the theatrical marketplace, and they're just against the idea, and they want to make sure that the lawmakers apply the strictest definitions of anti-competition laws and stuff to make sure that they scrutinize this deal and hopefully not pass it, because for a lot of filmmakers, like I mentioned earlier, there's now one less studio they can work with or sell their movies to, and they're worried about the fact that Warner Brothers Discovery movies that now currently go to theaters, like up to 15 of them a year, they will not be going to theaters because Netflix is not a theatrical company. Like Ted Sarandos even today did not make it very convincing argument for himself, saying that the theatrical the window is going to evolve over time to be more consumer friendly, aka shorter, and probably eventually not exist at all. So anyway. But hey, David Zaslav, talk about him making out like a king from all of this, right? Because this guy, when he took over, when Discovery bought Warner Brothers, remember a few years ago, the stock was trading at $24 per share, and it then proceeded to drop all the way down to, I believe, $7 a share. And then this year, before the sale talks started, before the Paramount reports came out, it had risen to like $13 a share. Today, it was trading at 24 some odd dollars a share. Pretty much a complete full circle recovery from when they had merged the two companies together, Warner Brothers Discovery. So David Zaslav is making out of this with, if you go off of the numbers for the amount of stocks and stock options he owns in Warner Brothers Discovery, they're estimating, if you multiply that by the value of the shares that Netflix just paid, David Zaslav is going to have potentially 500 to 660 million dollars worth of shares that he's going to get paid for from this deal. Like, the dude is going to get almost $1 billion and a job on top of that in the new company. And he might not be done, getting all that moolah, because guys, it looks like the Ellisons will not go down without a fight. And according to the CNBC article, David Ellison, the CEO of Paramount Skydance, has made WBD CEO David Zaslav a lot richer with nothing to show for it, as of course the company agreed to sell its studio and streaming business in Netflix. But Paramount now, they're considering a hostile takeover bid. How? And this is something we talked about before, because now that the bidding process is technically over, they don't have to abide by the NDA, which would have prevented them from doing this. But if you guys remember back in the day when, for example, as an analogy, when Disney was going to buy Fox and they'd agreed to a deal, Comcast came in with an offer that was, very competitive, I think, if not like higher than what Disney had offered. And they forced Disney to up their offer. And then in that process, Disney had to sell Sky, which is like the British broadcaster. And then Comcast ended up buying Sky, and then the rest of Fox was bought by Disney. But Comcast drove up the price of Fox for Disney by several $1 billion. I remember it was a pretty big jump in price. But now Paramount might be either looking to do the same thing, or I mean, ultimately they still want to buy Warner Brothers Discovery. So what they can do is they can go directly to the shareholders above the board of directors who just signed the deal with Netflix and tell them, like, for example, we want to give you $30 or whatever, like, per share, which would be higher than what Netflix just paid, $27.75 per share. And if they do that, and if, the shareholders agree to a vote and majority votes for the Paramount deal, this could all still flip in the favor of Paramount, potentially. And Paramount keeps insisting that as far as getting U.S. regulatory approval, they're going to have a much easier time with it. So call them desperate or call them whatever you want to call them. Paramount still has a couple of, things up its sleeve in terms of like trying to get back in the race. And of course, they're still the only bidder who were interested in all of Warner Brothers Discovery's assets, including the television networks that currently Netflix will not be, keeping. They'll be just spinning them off next year. So yeah, Paramount might not be done yet. And whether you think they're villains or not, yeah, I don't know. Like this was always going to be something that Paramount would try to do if they didn't win the battle, that they didn't win the bidding war. So I'm not surprised by that, honestly. But yeah, we'll see. I mean, this is currently the speculation, and they're definitely considering it. But I want to ask you guys a question. What do you think? Let me know in the comments down below. Is this Netflix Warner's deal really such a disaster for Hollywood? Because of course the Directors Guild released a statement saying they're concerned about this, and they're talking to Netflix about making sure that we provide a competitive marketplace for filmmakers and give them the creative space and the resources to tell their stories. We saw Cinema United, which is like all the theater owners union, rally against it. There's another union potentially, others unions are also speaking out about it. There was a rumor in this article, and I'm not going to go through this in very much detail, but on the Puck, they were reporting that there was a rumor out there, and one of the talent agencies might coordinate like a joint, sort of rebellion, or just completely, protesting and swearing off working with Warner Brothers because they want to prevent this from happening. I'm forgetting the word for that. What is that? Like, what would that mean? Like boycotting Warner Brothers Netflix. So if that happens, then none of the talent agencies want to work with them. Then that means their actors that they have on their rosters are not working with Warner Brothers. Then that might be a problem for Warner Brothers trying to make television shows and movies. So yeah. Yeah, I know. This whole episode is about that, dude. And then we got some quick hits. Then we got DCU Daily. So anyway, but look, the other thing I wanted to mention before we finish up, you guys were talking about how like this doesn't get passed through regulatory approvals, and then that's how the deal falls apart. Well, think about it this way. I know one of you guys mentioned, how is Paramount and how would Paramount combining with Warner Brothers Discovery not make a bigger company than Netflix combining with Warner Brothers? Well, apparently one of the arguments that Netflix is making in their favor. Now this is a chart, Nielsen chart, so they're the same guys who do TV ratings, that shows us the monthly TV viewing percentage by distributor. So as a total, all of these numbers add up to 100%. And so as a percentage of all the TV viewing, what are people watching the most in terms of who's got the market shares? And so if you look at these numbers, believe it or not, YouTube is the biggest player in town, 12.9%. Then Disney is the second one. Now this here includes broadcast television, cable television, and streaming. So it's combining all of those pieces together. So it's not just streaming alone, right? Because Disney owns, between all their streaming services like ESPN Unlimited, Hulu, Disney Plus, and all their television networks like ABC and FX and all of that, they have the second highest percentage of viewership across the board. Hello, even Girl, welcome back to the chat. So yeah, I think WGA will seriously contest these enterprising. I agree with you there. But then when you look at the numbers for Paramount has an 8.2% share. Then below Paramount, you have Netflix at 8%. So you keep going down. Below Netflix, you have Warner Brothers Discovery, and their share of the market is 5.6% in terms of monthly viewing by television distributor. Right? So like all the television channels and all the streaming services of Warner Brothers combined for 5.6%. So if you combine Paramount and Warner Brothers Discovery, they're 8.2% with the 5.6%. That's 13.8%. That would be the new biggest entity combined together. But if you combine Netflix's 8% and then Warner Brothers Discovery's 5.6%, that's a 13.6%. Which is still the highest, but it's really not even a full percentage point because YouTube is 12.9%. So if you're looking at those metrics, then this doesn't make Netflix like the king of streaming. Sure, they have better quality content on average than YouTube, but YouTube has like well, YouTube has like everything. Like YouTube has a lot of stuff. So the argument Netflix is going to make with all the regulators and potentially like, any kind of lawsuits is that, hey, guys, we are not that bigger than that, not going to be that much bigger than YouTube. Not to mention, this chart includes all the television networks that Warner Brothers Discovery currently owns, like TNT, TBS, True TV, all of those things. Those will all get spun off. So what about after all those television networks are taken away from the Warner Brothers percentage, the new combined market share, according to this metric, which is monthly television viewing by distributor on Nielsen, which is what Netflix wants to use, or reportedly at least, their number will be lower than YouTube. They still won't be the biggest player in the market. They might be somewhere between YouTube and Disney, maybe even lower than Disney, right? So that's the argument they're making, that with YouTube and Disney being such big players, we would only become one of the three biggest ones. We wouldn't run away with it. But if you look at by other metrics like the subscriber numbers, Netflix has by far the biggest, 300 million subscribers. HBO, I think, has like the third highest with 130. You got, Disney in between that. I think they have like 200 million plus. So there is overlap as well. So it's not like a lot of HBO subscribers also have Netflix, right? And vice versa. So when you combine the 130 of HBO and the 300 of Netflix, you're probably going to end up at like somewhere in the neighborhood of 300 to 400, which will still be the highest. And it was almost double what Disney Plus has, but it's not running away with it as much. So even in that, while that metric, it's more convincing for the don't merge Netflix with Warner Brothers argument. It's still not quite like, oh wow, they're like running away with it because Disney is so big and because YouTube is so big. So that's the argument for why that, they want to make sure this actually goes through. So yeah, I mean, with all that said, ultimately it's going to take 12 to 18 months and potentially longer. It might take 2 years. Like it was in this article in the Puck that, so this reporter, Matthew Bellany, has some inside, track to studio executives who work in other studios across Hollywood and such. And they were texting him last night saying, please turn out the lights on the Hollywood sign, as in Hollywood is dead. RIP cinema, 1895 to 2025. They did it. They killed Hollywood. And one of them in this article DM'd him saying, when are they going to even get this done? Like in late 2028? And it's very possible if there's a lawsuit against them, it might take them a couple of years to get through all of it. So I would not be surprised if that were the case. But hey, again, we'll have to wait and see. But ultimately, the big news is, guys, that as of today, Netflix has agreed to buy Warner Brothers Discovery for $82.7 billion. So the big B. And wow, that's a bigger deal than when, Disney bought Fox. And well, this merger, it will take some time to sort itself out. Paramount might still have a say in when all things settle and the dust clears. The Ellisons still, are not giving up hope, according to reports. But you let me know in the comments what you think about this. What projects do you want Netflix to take out of the vaults at Warner Brothers and make them work? What about, stuff that Netflix has that now, like, they can make Stranger Things games with Warner Brothers games? Maybe they should do that. What shows would you like to see, on Netflix that, previously used to be there, but then Warner Brothers pulled them to HBO? Like Friends. Would you want to see Friends back on Netflix? Let us know. Thank you for tuning in and watching. But guys, we're not done yet. Not even close. We've got the quick hits coming up. I remember I mentioned we've got the quick hits on this show, and then we've got the quick hits coming up later on in the show, or later on in the DCU Daily Show. So with that, I'm going to hit that quick hits music, and we're going to get through this, shall we? So let's talk about the quick hits. I'm excited to get into these. Is the music playing? Yeah, I think the music is playing. There we go. All right, so let's talk about the quick hits. I've got them loaded up right here. And we've got a few of them to get into. A bunch of them will be related to the Netflix merger, but there's a few fun ones. So, Lord of the Rings Extended Editions return to theaters as Fellowship of the Ring turns 25, guys. So, next year, according to this article that are exclusive in Variety, we're going to be getting in honor of the Fellowship of the Ring's 25th anniversary, Fathom Entertainment and Warner Brothers are going to be bringing all 3 extended editions of the films, the original trilogy from Peter Jackson, back to theaters in 2026. They will screen them in D-Box presentation from January 16th to the 19th, and then in standard formats from 23rd of January to the 25th. So this is interesting. In addition to bringing the extended films back to the big screen, limited time Lord of the Rings themed concession items will be available at select participating theaters. AMC moviegoers can look out for limited edition popcorn buckets. Ooh. Featuring maps of Middle Earth with Regal and local cinema patrons can get buckets with the One Ring design. Okay. All right, buckets with the One Ring design. I'm interested in that. That'd be nice. Collect some. They weren't doing that back when the movies came out originally, so that's nice. That's good to see. How much of that are we going to see in the future when they're part of Netflix? Warner Brothers is. I don't know. We'll find out. But let's keep on going here, shall we? So, David Zaslav on the this is something I mentioned earlier. So he held a town hall with his employees at Warner Brothers Discovery. I mean, not everybody was in the room, but I'm sure the stream did across the company for the employees to watch. So he was talking about possible layoffs in the Netflix sale, and here's what he said. The intention is they'll want to keep most people because they don't have a lot. And here's what he means by that. I'll give you guys the readout of the full quote here. So he said, I understand that the last couple of weeks have been disruptive and it's tough to read about every day. Zaslav said during a global town hall with Warner Brothers Discovery employees Friday following the announcement of the deal, a recording of which was obtained by Variety. And where are we going to end up, says David Zaslav, and the idea of coming together with another company, there are going to be some trepidation. Okay, understandable. I understand that, but it is a good fit. The intention is that they want to keep most people because they don't have a lot. They don't have a motion picture studio. They don't have a big gaming business, and so it feels very good for our employees. So basically what he is saying is, they're not going to be doing mass layoffs because they don't have a lot of what we have. And so there's not a lot of low overlap, and that kind of works in our favor, so a lot of people can keep their jobs, which I think would be a good thing. By the way, I don't think under Netflix they're going to be making a WB land. That's probably something that we are now moving further away from. The only way that might have happened is if Universal, Comcast ended up buying them. That's less likely to happen. In fact, I'd be concerned about whether they would continue to have, all the Harry Potter stuff at Universal. Chances are they'll keep it around, but we'll see. Matthew Bellany, of course, who writes for The Puck, also dropped some news yesterday, or a couple of days ago, saying Paramount just signed director John M. Chu to a big film and TV first look deal, taking over his arrangement from Warner Brothers. Of course, John M. Chu has directed the Wicked movies, so he's been working with Universal, so his deal with Warner Brothers was not exclusive, but now Paramount has managed to, swipe him away. They've also got James Mangold, of course, we know that, and James Wan, I think, is over at Universal now. So in this news, John M. Chu, after he's done with Wicked, he's going to be moving his offices from Warner Brothers to the Paramount lot. Universal did try to get in on the action, but they just came up short. They couldn't pay or give him the terms that John M. Chu wanted. So I guess, Paramount got something out of this week at least. So let's keep on going here. Now we're going to go into some more DC related news, and let's talk about Weapons director Zach Krieger apparently met with Paramount, including David Ellison, to discuss getting his DC movie made. So he reportedly had talks with Paramount, expressing his desire to direct a DC film, which we're presuming is the Henchman movie that we have talked about in the past. And they said they would be more than happy to make that decision, which potentially, again, this is what I'm saying, that might have meant they were going to go over the head of James Gunn and Peter Safran to do that. They might have said, okay, we're greenlighting this movie. You guys are making it. This is happening. Zach Krieger's doing this. Will Netflix do that? I mean, as long as David Zaslav is in charge of Warner Brothers Studios under Netflix, chances are that's not going to happen, because he's going to give James Gunn, much more of that freedom to do what he wants to do. The freedom and just make sure that he's responsible for DC Studios and not overstepping and, giving James Gunn the breathing room to do the job. Now, one of the other quick hits here, James Gunn's DC was one of the highlights during recent Netflix investors meetings. So one can presume that the DCU is safe, aka Netflix talked really highly about the DC studios right now and the way it's currently presented. They also were talking about HBO Max. They were talking about the game consumer product and experiences division, which includes Warner Brothers games. So you have Mortal Kombat as part of that. So you can assume that at this point, Netflix likes a lot of what Warner Brothers is, as is, and will not try to change it too much once they end up closing the purchase deal to buy Warner Brothers. So that's a good sign. I like that. Brendan Sklenar also was asked about the rumors that he could play James Gunn's Batman, and this is from a USA Today interview where he said, I mean, that would be a dream, wouldn't it? I was in Spain filming, and as I walked down the street, someone was like, Batman, and I'm always surprised by it. You don't realize the reach of these things. I'd be lying if I said I haven't worked on my Batman voice. Well, if I keep talking like this for a couple of more hours, I might be working on my Batman voice, but anyway, look, you guys tell me, what do you think? Brendan Sklenar's Batman, he's clearly interested. He's been working on his voice, and people on the street in Spain seem to think he already is Batman. So I guess we'll see. Yeah, just pitch it to Gunn. There you go. Whether it's the Zach Krieger movie or Brendan Sklenar as Batman. I guess we'll find out if he ends up getting the job or not, right? Like, probably not in the very distant future. Probably next year sometime, I bet we're going to get a Batman announcement. But David Zaslav apparently will remain as the CEO of Warner Brothers following Netflix's purchase. This is from the Financial Times article I was looking at earlier with you guys. So according to that article, they were saying David Zaslav is set to stay as the head of the new Warner Brothers Discovery Studios. So of course we know Discovery Television is going to get spun off as its own thing, and then the studios and the streaming business will be part of Netflix. Now we don't know how Netflix is going to merge HBO into their streaming service, or if they're going to keep them separate or some kind of bundle. But as far as the movie studios go, it looks like, according to the report from Financial Times, David Zaslav will continue to be in charge of that, and so he will still have a role managing that part of the business. And they'll continue to distribute movies and TV shows separately from what Netflix does with their own stuff. So like basically Stranger Things and everything will stay under Netflix, and then everything like The Last of Us and stuff will stay under, and DC will stay under Warner Brothers, which will now be like a Netflix company essentially. And David Zaslav will still own that whole process. Will own that part of the process. So there we go. Which is, good news. Good to see that. Good to hear. Because, again, if David Zaslav is around, I think that makes James Gunn's job a little bit more safer. You know what? We're going to get into the hot takes on DCU Daily. I'm saving that for DCU Daily, so later on tonight. If you haven't gotten a hot take in, go into the community post section, drop them there, and then we'll bring them in to the next show, because we got DCU Daily coming up with John. I'm going to take a bit of a break. We're going to go back live for DCU Daily separately, and then we'll do Fancast Friday. But until then, Peaky Blinders movie, we just got a first look for that. Speaking of Netflix, Cillian Murphy is returning for this theatrical and streaming release in March. This is one of those movies that Netflix is putting out in theaters for a little bit. So in March of next year, we're going to get it in theaters, select theaters from March 6th. And then it's going to be on Netflix March 20th. I'm excited for this. They're just continuing this saga, and you got Barry Keoghan in there, you got Cillian Murphy, and a host of other fantastic actors. So I can't wait for this to come out. And maybe this is an indication that Netflix is opening up more and more to the idea of theatricals. So we'll have to wait and see. You know what? The Police Academy reboot, I don't know. Maybe that does happen. I would like to see a Netflix do a Police Academy reboot. Wouldn't that be nice? I would love to see that. I wouldn't mind seeing that. I don't know about you guys. Barbie 2 probably continues the way it is. I don't actually know if they're looking to make a Barbie 2, honestly. I think Greta Gerwig's moving on. She's doing Narnia now, which is for Netflix, so who knows? But hey, Blackpink's Lisa, Dawn Lee. I think Dawn Lee was in the Eternals, right, on the left. And then Squid Game star Lee Jin-wook are set to lead Netflix's Extraction universe thriller, Taigo. That's nice. I guess they're expanding the universe further. Cool. All right. Well, that's Netflix. More Netflix. Well, and then the last thing here. I'm just going to ask you guys the question. You guys let me know. Is Netflix trying to buy Warner Brothers or kill it? Because Ted Sarandos is still pretty much saying that long-term Warner Brothers movies might not be in theaters for as long as they are currently. And of course, they might ultimately want to like merge it all into like one entity anyway. So did they buy Warner Brothers just to kill off another competitor? Kind of like, you know, what Facebook did back in the day when they bought Instagram. Like, what do you guys think? You let me know. Like, is this something that we should be worried about? Is it gonna be disastrous for Hollywood? That's the question I'll leave you guys with, because hey, you know what? I've been talking for long enough, and hopefully, you know, you guys have a little more information about how all of this went down for the deal that allowed Netflix to basically jump ahead of the line of Paramount and leave Comcast in the dust and agree to an $82.7 billion deal to buy Warner Brothers Discovery. Let us know in the comments down below what you think about all of that, the quick hits. And with that, I'm going to wrap up the show here. Remember, we're back probably within the hour, so give us a little bit of time. I'm gonna go rest my voice, and then John and I will be back with DCU Daily, and then we will be doing Fancast Friday. Until then, everybody, thanks so much for watching. Hit the like button on the way out. We do appreciate that, and of course, hit subscribe and hit the notification bell, because that way you'll know when we're live in the next hour. And we'll be live for the rest of the night. So with that, I'll talk to you guys in a bit, and I'm gonna hit the news intro as we're on our way out. So I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching. Bye.
It doesn't seem to matter what I do. I'm always the number two.
All right, Mr. I need to paint my abs on to get nominated. You don't see Robert Downey doing that.
You're kidding.
Robert
You're
Downey.
kidding.
I can't open the envelope without
Warner Brothers is heading back into the Matrix with a new movie in the works.
Wonder what other surprises are in store.
I want to be Bruce Wayne. I like that. You're gonna love me.
There's the shot right there. That.
Okay, we don't need to see Corbin.
Right there.
You look ridiculous.
Well, not no more, he don't.
What, dude? I can barely understand you. Your accent's insane.
Give me a hand up. Nope, I'm actually okay. Thank you very much. Oh, wow. Wow.
this.